Thanks, Jim. Thanks to the whole team that's here, and there's a bunch of people working that I can't see,
sir.
I'm sure, but thanks for hosting the event. And as always, I think like the other service chiefs, my counterparts, great to have the opportunity to engage. I think the questions and answer session are probably the most powerful. I'm going to start my comments from probably an angle that you're not going to expect, but it's particularly, I think, for a conference like this, which is focused on U.S. defense programs. So I'd ask you just to indulge me for a moment on a story. This month, Japan marks the 116th anniversary of the Battle of Tsushima. One of history's most consequential naval conflicts, one that Mike Gilday would know off the top of his head, very familiar with. That battle was between Russia, which at that time an established, powerful European and Asian empire, and Japan, which was a rising power in the East. And when sailors from both of those countries manned their battle stations, and the time frame again is 1905, and it's May 27th, nobody really knew how the outcome was going to play, what the outcome might be. Because Russia, coming to that fight, had a number of strengths. Population 3 times larger than Japan. Iron and steel production 60 times greater than Japan. Russia spent 3 times more on defense, and it maintained the world's largest military, which at that time was 6 times larger than Japan's. It had the world's 3rd largest fleet, and the history people will know what the other number 1 and 2 are. And that fleet, Russia's fleet, had more battleships in the Far East than Japan had in its entire inventory. And probably not a small factor, Russia had centuries of warfighting and naval experience that they could draw from. But the battle ended up completely a lopsided victory for Japan. 31 of 38 Russian ships sunk or captured, including every one of their battleships. 5,000 Russian sailors killed, 6,000 captured. On the other side, Japan lost 3 torpedo boats, 100 killed, 300 injured, or 600 injured. But I think more significantly, the battle resulted in a really profound change in international order or world order. It was the first time in history where a European power was really defeated, not really, but was defeated consequentially by an Asian power. And that would be sort of the harbinger of some conflicts that would come in the subsequent decades. So how did that battle result in such a lopsided outcome that was not predicted? As always, there's a number of factors, including for Russia, it had a logistical challenge, maritime logistical challenges. They had intelligence challenges, they had personnel challenges, but what was the overarching reason for Japan's success? I would offer that in the decade prior to that battle in 1905, the Japanese Navy modernized itself with determination and speed and ferocity. Not only did it procure the cutting-edge technology, the cutting-edge vessels, given its fleet, at that time it had a qualitative advantage because it had a 3 to 4 knot advantage over Russian vessels. It also modernized its tactics, its warfighting concepts, how they were organized, ordnance, training, everything. As a measure, the Japanese sailors, by the time this battle started, they could fire almost 4 times faster than the Russian sailors could. The Japanese Navy modernized, in other words, inside the context of an overarching sort of growth in Japan at that time, both economically and you could argue diplomatically, and within their own society as well. Take it back 50 years. In the 1850s, Japan was really an agrarian feudal society. No industrial base, no infrastructure, no iron or coal production, no manufacturing capability, no national military, no navy, 50 years prior. For its most recent naval experience, if you were Japan, it would have been 250 years earlier. But by 1905, after really a methodical program of modernization and industrialization, it had become a powerhouse. So why am I bringing up this anecdote this morning? I think sometimes historical anecdotes, they tend to invite comparisons between them and now, like today. But that's not actually my entire purpose this morning. I also would ask for their forgiveness, because with 1,000 people online, there's historians in there, and they're going to take me to task for really oversimplifying, so I just beg your indulgence up front. But I raised what some might consider perhaps an obscure historical anecdote for three main reasons. First, it really illustrates just how quickly and just how dramatically global security dynamics can change. In a matter of even a decade, the balance of regional power, regional military capabilities can really shift dramatically, as it did in 1905, with the outcome of a single battle being so consequential. We're in a period of dynamic change now, technologically, economically, geopolitically. The rapid rise of China, which I'm sure is a point of discussion yesterday and today, in particular, has shifted the strategic landscape around us. And while China's economic growth, I would say, was well forecasted and well understood, its military growth was not so much. We're now in a position, my view, that's unfamiliar and uncomfortable for us. We are actually pacing China in some key technological and industrial sectors, rather than leading in everywhere across the board, which is where we're used to being. Second, the historical anecdote, the episode I brought up, I think it also demonstrates how an established power, in this case Russia, can be the victim of their own strength. They were buoyed by a really strong economy, military power, a great history of winning battles, and a lot of extensive combat experience that they were depending on. But they did not respect the threat, and they paid for it. Hubris, in other words, is a dangerous thing, and the cost of arrogance in terms of blood and treasure for a nation can be tremendous. And finally, I think I bring up this battle because it really demonstrates that how, in their case and today, amphibious modernization can be harnessed with strategic effect. And that's why I want to anchor my comments today. The intersection, in other words, of modernization and strategic advantage. As many of you know, and Jim highlighted, the Marine Corps is in a period of significant change. Our overall modernization effort, which is organizational, it's doctrine, it's technology, it's training, it's all of that, personnel, it all falls under the banner of, as you mentioned, Force Design 2030. So why now? Well, the truth is that despite, I would offer, dramatic changes in the landscape, which all of you are very familiar with over the past couple of decades, we remain a force that really looks a lot the same as 2011 or even 2001. Despite all the operations, we're built for big power projection ashore, we're built for sustained land operations. So in terms of design, the Marine Corps 2021, not very different than 20 years ago. And regardless of the success of that force over the past 20 years, it's no longer, in our opinion, it's no longer helping the fleet or the larger joint force deter, nor is it really designed for the types of gray zone competition that folks are writing and speaking about today. They're more commonplace. To put bluntly, we are too big, we're too heavy, we're not expeditionary, we're too concentrated in certain areas of the globe and at certain sites that really lack resilience. We're ground-centric. So the changes in the operating environment that are familiar to this audience, and I don't need to explain it any differently, but for the first time in a generation, for me, we have a strategic competitor, and that is China. And that's both, I'm talking both military and economic when I say strategic competitor. And while Beijing, really their goal, as everyone understands, is to change the world order, the international order, it's not alone, because you have Russia, you have Korea, you have Iran, all of which everybody knows is trying to do their worst, really to upset the global stability. Within that context, I think it's imperative that our leaders, all of us, have the right military capabilities to deter war. and to compete across the spectrum from gray zone all the way up to conventional conflict. Admiral Davidson testified a couple weeks ago, maybe a week, 10 days ago. He talked about, when he was referring to China, he said that the greatest challenge, and I'm going to paraphrase, but the greatest challenge to the United States really is our lack of conventional deterrence capability. And he used his own words, but he said that's what's going to invite violence in the future, is that lack of that. That's, in other words, that is what's necessary to prevent conflict, to protect U.S. interests. And thirdly, he pointed out, to assure our allies and partners. I could not agree more with how he laid it out. So how do we go about then restoring conventional deterrence? Here, I think I'm going to draw from Secretary Austin's recent comments, because he asked the same question in a little bit different lens, and I'm quoting him. He said, a basic truth within the minds of our potential foes is that the costs and the risks of aggression are out of line with any conceivable benefit. But it was posed as a question: how do you get there? Central to that question, I would think, is strategic advantage. We have to start, in other words, by acknowledging that we do not own an advantage in all domains, everywhere, all the time. We don't have the dominance or the superiority in every area all the time, or in all domains. They have advantages. Our peer competitors, our strategic competitors, have advantages in some key areas. And even if we could, which we're not going to, if we had big fat budgets and we had all the money we needed, I'm not sure that that's the right approach anyway, because chasing that, trying to regain that dominance in every area all the time against a peer competitor, I think is a fool's errand. So we have to go back to strategy. So if our strategy is principally aimed to deter conflict, then we got to ask, what are the capabilities that give us an advantage, that allow you to achieve your strategic ends, your objective? And our resource decisions, which is the centerpiece for yesterday and today, they have to be prioritized accordingly. Second, we have to think through the idea of pacing. And I won't spend a lot of time there, but I think there are domains where we should discuss where we're comfortable lagging, where we're comfortable in a parity sort of mode, and where we must maintain an advantage. And many of them have been discussed yesterday and today as well. In other words, where are you in front, where are you sort of astride, and where are you behind, and do you know how far behind you are, and how long it would take to close that gap? All of that is risk. That's strategic risk. So our assessment, my assessment today of the strategic environment, is that the naval expeditionary capabilities that the CNO and I talk about, those capabilities, they can provide the Joint Force Commander that ability to deter and then respond. And those are capabilities that we need to build. In fact, I think the idea of strategic advantage and its essential linkage to deterrence, that has actually been the primary driver of Force Design 2030, that intersection that I'm speaking of. The second major factor driving force design is an acknowledgement, I think, I'll speak for the Marine Corps, but also I think within the Joint Force, that we don't have the capabilities we need to effectively compete in the gray zone, however you'd like to define it. And we are being outcycled. They are eating our lunch in this gray zone area. Part of that is because they play by a different set of rules. They're blurring the lines between police forces and Coast Guard and military and politics. They're blurring that intentionally. We have very clear lanes that we stay in, and we haven't moved off of that. We have not adjusted. We have to. Most of our ships, I would offer today, very large, very capable, sometimes too big, sometimes too even escalatory for that gray zone area where we need to focus on. This is where General Dunford focused his comments sometimes on allies and partners and the significance of matching up with them, which everybody's very familiar with it. So a couple thoughts about where we're going, and then we'll take questions and answers. This Force Design 2030 and where we're headed into the future, and a little bit about the budget and what drives us. I'm gonna just categorize it in 4 areas. First, the Marine Corps that we're headed to, very maritime, very naval in character, I would offer, and our outlook. We are reorienting from a ground, sustained land forces mode, which we've had to do for the nation for the past 20 years, into a naval expeditionary maritime mode. This littoral warfare is where you expect the Marine Corps to come on strong, and that's where we're headed. I think this means shifting, in other words, our forces, focusing now inwards on how do we support the Navy, how do we support the fleet commander in missions like anti-surface, but even subsurface warfare, which is a strength of the U.S. Joint Force. It means building a force that will contribute, I think, to what the Navy and us call sea denial and sea control. What is our role in that? And how do we sanitize a strait? How do we control a strait? The key maritime avenues that the nation needs kept open, and our partners and allies need kept open. I think that naval orientation is clearly driving our investments in things like long-range precision fires, things like light amphibious warships. These are programs that need the capabilities that need to support the fleet commander. We need less tanks. We need less short-range towed artillery, which suited our needs prior, not a good match for what we need to do going forward. The ground-based anti-ship missile, which has gotten some press coverage over the past week, 10 days, I think falls into that category as well. Very successful test. Back up a couple, 3 years ago, some really bright people from the Marine Corps Systems Command and some engineers put their heads together, and the end result is you take the top off of a joint light tactical vehicle, you make it remote controlled or autonomous, you put a MLR on the back of it that can elevate, put a naval strike missile in there, and now you have a capability, which we demonstrated recently by off the coast of California sinking a moving ship. Okay, this is where we've got to go at that kind of speed. I think that's conventional deterrence, because that's a capability that makes an adversary think twice. That is that program, ground-based anti-ship missile, that's our #1 priority in the '22 budget. Second, I think our force must be lighter, must be more mobile, has to be more expeditionary. So we got to be able to operate from a diverse set of maritime platforms. Some of them will be conventional amphibious ships, but everything else that floats as well, from Tagos type ships to corvettes, frigates, you name it, we should be kind of comfortable operating from those ships. The light amphibious warship that we're and the Navy are working to procure, that's going to give us the organic mobility that we so desperately need in the littorals anywhere in the world. Because if you don't have it organically and you have to bring it from the outside, it's going to be tough. All that on a global scale, I think this is how you prevent an adversary. This is how you make him think twice, in Admiral Davidson's vernacular, about taking the next move. Third, our force has got to be more resilient, got to be more survivable. And I would separate here that from what some people think of being invisible or I can't be detected. That's not the only way to be survivable. The centerpiece here, I would say, is Marine littoral regiments. They're going to command smaller, more distributed, more dispersed, smaller, maneuverable teams. They're going to operate every day, every week inside the adversary's weapon engagement zone. Inside there persistently all the time. Small footprint, mobile, can operate from a ship or from a shore, light logistical footprint. And the distribution and sustainment of that, of course, are key. And here's where I think the industry that's on the net today can help us, can help the Marine Corps. Because we have got to figure out, we got to develop the technologies to how do you logistically support a distributed force. In other words, of all the things that we're working on in the naval force and narrowly within the Marine Corps, this is the hardest problem, I think, going forward. This is the logistical sustainment in a distributed environment, in a contested environment. How do you do that? Because nobody has challenged our supply lines for 70 years. Finally, unmanned systems. Like you may have heard from CNO, I'm not sure what he covered, but unmanned systems in the Marine Corps, central, more prominent role. We're doubling the inventory of our unmanned aerial squadrons, UAS squadrons. Why? So that we can compete and beat the adversary in that sort of what we call reconnaissance, counter-reconnaissance competition. These are going to be everything from big wing, medium altitude, long endurance aircraft, which the Air Force has a deep history in, and we're drawing from all the way down to the tactical, longer range unmanned aerial systems that we can fly off of our ships. Future platforms, I think, designed intentionally for undersea warfare, carrying everything from weapon systems, sonar buoys, everything, sensor packages. And I think as we experiment wargame, we're going to learn a lot about how we reimagine capabilities going forward. And what, in one aspect, just to highlight what many are familiar with, the Marine Expeditionary Unit, the MEU, which every combatant commander is very familiar with. What does that mean going forward? In the past, I think, and we have to avoid just the newer, best version of ourselves. That's not going to keep pace going forward. We've got to move at the kind of speed that General C.Q. Brown talks about. How do we use, for example, we have conventional amphib ships. They have well decks. Could we use unmanned systems, employ them out of the well deck of a ship? And could we do that for a subsurface fight? I think it's possible. How do we use a long-range unmanned surface vessel with other unmanned platforms operating from them in a loitering manner? All these are things we have to tackle, I believe. In the near and midterm, I would say, in macro terms, I think within a decade, half of our aviation, half of our logistics will be unmanned. This is all wargaming driven, and I think the characteristics of the Marine Corps of the future have to have the strategic advantages that I'm mentioning this morning. Why? Because that's what combatant commanders need to deter the conflict that they're trying to avoid. At the same time, I think it gives them the tools they need to compete in the gray zone every day, every week, postured forward. Make the adversaries think hard about taking the next step, give up no space. And as we modernize, again, I think we have to do it with a sense of humility. We have to avoid the hubris, the arrogance. We have to listen. We have to learn. Long and short of it, I think Secretary Austin mentioned it a couple weeks ago. He said, just being the best, and being the best today is not good enough. It isn't a guarantee of being the best in the future, and we're not going to get trapped in that. I'm very proud. I would just finish up, sir, telling you, absolutely proud of the Marines that are serving in uniform today. They are pushing hard. They are thinking hard about the future. They are driving the changes that we know need to go in place. We're going to make sure that the Marine Corps of the future and the Marine Corps of this afternoon is prepared. We're going to do everything we can to deter the conflict. But if one comes, we'll be in a posture ready to respond. And as always, you know, when you do have to send in the Marines, it'll be decisive. So I look forward to the questions and appreciate the opportunity this morning. Thank you.
Well spoken, sir.
Sir, I'll follow you. Well spoken. That was a lot to unpack.
It is a lot there.
You're going to punch me, sir. I apologize.
I don't think so.
Your discussion brought huge amount of IQ horsepower this morning in terms of the quality of the thinking, in terms of the comparison of how quickly an enemy can close the gap.
Yeah.
And number two, this is the one you're going to punch me for. I was standing there watching you brief, and I'm going, in my mind, he's coming up with the vision of a highly lethal to Chinese ships and to Chinese submarines, almost, Al's leaning back in his chair, he's terrified.
No, I'm
almost an unkillable cockroach. That no matter where President Xi goes, you're going to be there. And let me shut up. That was a very powerful picture you were building out for us?
I think the only thought I would offer is,
The cockroach?
well,
Sorry
no,
about
we've
that.
been called worse. Actually, cockroaches are pretty industrious and pretty resilient,
Yes, sir.
but not limited to the People's Republic of China, or the PLAN.
Yes, sir.
But that's our pacing challenge, okay?
Yes,
I
sir.
understand what that means, but we've not got a good track record of predicting where the next bad
Yes,
thing
sir.
happens, so I think you expect the naval forces to be global.
Yes,
and
sir.
that's what we do. That's where we are.
Yes, sir.
Cockroach, I have to think
Yes,
about
sir.
that.
To be honest, sir, I wish I will regret that tomorrow morning when I read the press kits. I wish I could have come up with maybe something more like a honey badger, right? So it's something that's just completely something that lions don't want to deal with. Yes, sir. So let me replace and I'm killing myself here. So I see myself dying in your eyes as we speak.
No, it's all good.
But maybe the honey badger.
All right.
I thought that was terrific. I think you should hopefully have it taped and get permission to go ahead and publish that. I was thinking about my experience as a squadron commander in Germany when the wall fell. And, we were about 20 clicks from the bad guys if something had gone on. And that was the last time we had a real adversary. And I've gone through 30 years of people in the Pentagon saying we have to think about the future. But Force Design 2030 is really the first radical sea change that I have seen. So I think it's terrific. I'd like to see it published. You probably don't want to see it published, General, but tying it back to the Russia-Japan war, I think is a brilliant way to frame it. So
Yep.
you have a lot of people out here who have questions, and they didn't come here to hear me talk, so I'm going to go ahead and start calling on them right away. And,
Good.
so we'll start with Bob Fitzpatrick from Raytheon. Bob, if you're there, you're on mute.
We're going to have Bob Fitzpatrick here again.
Oh, I hear him.
Berger, can you hear me?
You got to shout, sir. We can hardly hear you.
Okay. General Berger, thank you for your service and all you're doing for our Marine Corps. Just as Jim indicated, and as well as you articulated in your opening remarks with regards to Force Design 2030, Phase 1 and Phase 2 report, and your recently released update on your 2021, would be interested if you wouldn't mind sharing with the entire group the reception that Congress has with regards to your Force Design 2030 and the feedback you've gotten from them.
Just make sure I understood the reception in Congress.
The reception in
Is that what
Congress
you
to
heard?
Force Design 2030.
Reception
I
of
think
your
that's what I
Force
heard.
Design.
And is Congress support?
Yeah.
I think Congress supporting the huge change, because we heard Chairman Smith up here today say find your resources internally. And I know every time I tried to do that, the board of directors on the other side of the hill would come and whack me and say, you can't make that change.
Well, the short answer is yes. There is support within Congress. I think for different reasons, of course, because Congress isn't one homogeneous body. But I think the way I was raised and the way I tried to explain humility, as we were beginning this path, I went and met with Senator Reid and Chairman Smith, both. And both of them offered the same advice. Shouldn't surprise anybody. They said, when you get far enough down the path, when you have a fairly good idea of where you're going and what you're going to need from Congress, then you would be wise to make appointments with each of the 8 ranking and chairs in the defense committees and go see them individually. He said it'll take a lot of time. But what you'll do is they may not agree with you, but
Yes,
you
sir.
also will lay out your logic. They'll have a chance to ask you questions. So that's the approach that I took. 8 individual meetings, great advice from both Congressman Smith and Senator Reid, and I don't think they would be upset for me sharing that out of school, because I've asked them for coaching, for mentoring along the way. That's the kind that you want to listen to and you want to follow. not everybody agrees, of course, and I respect that they have constituencies and other issues and other factors bigger than me. But the logic is hard to argue against.
Right.
That my sense is we must change, and we can't wait to change. We could a couple of years ago. We can no longer wait.
Correct.
Because if we waited a year or two, my assessment is we could not then catch up. Now, some things may change. Congress may change, China may change, Russia may change. But if the current path that we're on, we have to move now. And Congress, I've found to be very supportive, yes.
To your credit, sir, he, in a moment of passion during the Q&A this morning, Chairman Smith did bring up the fact that you were bending over backwards to self-fund everything that you were.
It's true.
In terms of you being frugal.
Now, that wasn't their advice. That was really internal advice and from previous commandants who said, before you ask Congress, you have to demonstrate with credibility that you've done all things possible within your own organization. So I said, well, okay, we're going to start down that path then. For 2 years at least, we'll not ask for one additional dollar, and we haven't. We've shrunk the size of our headquarters by 15%. We've cut legacy programs with the support of Congress. We've squeezed everything we can so that when it's time to ask Congress for assistance, their support, I'm confident we've wrung every bit of efficiency out of our organization up front and not asked for a dollar more.
And a stupid question, inside kind of your 46 billion-ish,
Yeah.
right? The 15 billion of MilPer, the 8 billion of O&M,
Yep.
3 billion USMC Marine Corps procurement, plus bits of SCN and APN, a little bit of RDT&E. Is there anything we've missed other than 12,000 Marine end strength, 15% headquarter reduction commensurately, shedding heavy armor, light towed, heavy bridging,
Right.
heavy sustainment?
Yep.
Is there anything else that we've missed that in terms of the things you've put on the self-funding table, capabilities that you're going to be bringing out of the force?
No. Personnel is our biggest cost. We don't own capital assets like ships that last for 40 or 50 years. So our strength in the Marine Corps is its people. It's also our biggest bill.
Yes, sir.
So nobody, no commandant, no service chief, I think, wants to shrink the size of your force.
But in retrospect, I just realized why it makes so much sense. Because of your bills, what your MilPer's like 15 billion-ish, it's like 3 times bigger than your actual procurement. It makes perfect sense.
But
that you would,
this is, this is the coaching from Chairman Smith is, the bet is that you get to keep that money and
Yes, sir.
reinvest it in your service.
Yes,
If
sir.
it gets scooped up and spent elsewhere, it's not going to be very good for the Marine Corps,
yes, sir.
which is why nobody does this. In other words,
Yes, sir.
you're betting that both in the Pentagon and in Congress they will support
Yes, sir.
that approach.
I did hear about a phantom letter that you had sent to the incoming team going, hey, this is the deal I kind of have, and it would really be awesome to if I'm sacrificing, if I can trade that capacity back for greater lethality somewhere else.
This is reprogramming, right?
Yeah,
Which
this
you
is
all both of you
reprogramming.
are very familiar with.
Yes, sir.
Somewhat constrained by statute, as it probably ought to be. But I need the latitude to take MilPer's money to put it over here.
Yes, sir.
If it gets scooped up and spent somewhere else in the department or elsewhere, I need to stop what I'm doing right then because this is a gambit that's taken the Marine Corps down
Yes,
down the wrong path.
Right.
And I'm wasting Al's time,
No.
but just as an editorial concept,
Sir.
and you're going to punch me for saying this, I don't know that it would have been as successful if it wasn't you as the commandant.
I don't know.
The way you come at, the way you intellectually and very humbly come at these trades as options of last resorts is something that is unusual in certainly over the last 10 years that I've seen.
I am the product, like every service chief, I'm the product of good mentoring,
Yes, sir.
good coaching.
Who is that mentor, by the way?
Oh, they're all the commandants before me, all the retired generals and sergeants major who you listen to,
Yes, sir. Okay.
and they've given me great advice.
Yes, sir. Al, I
I
slowed you
think
down.
that
I'm
no,
sorry,
I think
sir.
that's good. Yeah, typically the resistance doesn't come from the 4-star level. It doesn't come from the senior level. It comes from people who you're changing, typically underneath. So it's not that simple, but it was well done. Jason Props from Rolls-Royce. Jason, are you there? We're going through these quickly. Aidan Quigley, I know you're there. You were there earlier. You're up. Inside Defense.
Hi, and thanks again for doing this. I have a question on the light amphibious warship. In recent testimony to Congress, you mentioned that the Marine Corps is considering arming the light amphibious warship with containerized missiles. I'm wondering, what, if any, concrete steps has the service taken to explore that, and how much more do you think the law would cost if you did go down that path?
Can you just repeat the last 15, 20 seconds to make sure I got it right?
Yeah, so the light amphibious warship,
Yep.
What steps are you taking to explore adding missiles to it, and how
copy.
much more would it cost if you did that?
The lethality part of it, missiles mounted on a light amphibious warship, I would say I would put behind the value of getting the organic mobility now, fast. The lethality part of it, in other words, we have other means to provide the lethality if we need to. It would perhaps at some point would make sense to integrate some type of naval strike missile on a light amphibious warship. That's not the driver. The driver is to give a captain and a gunnery sergeant, a first sergeant, the ability to organically to move that force around in a littoral environment without it coming from 2,000 miles away. Give him an air means, a surface means, give him multiple ways to move that force around. So my focus is on the mobility of it. With a shallower draft, with a lower signature, and it's organic, that we can press and leave forward so that they can distribute that force. The lethality part, we'll have that discussion, but it's not the primary driver today.
Thanks.
It's good.
Unless you have a missile in mind that you want us to bolt onto the bow of that thing, and then I need to talk to the CNO about that.
I realized as you were talking, this change is going to take an awful lot of training and exercising. So that will be an interesting challenge just to manage that. It
will be. This is one of the intersections, I think, a natural one for the CNO and I, because their focus is on how to fight a fleet. Mm-hmm. Ours is on how to fight, and in a distributed environment, ours is how to marry that up. How do you support it? So I think the training you're talking about is a natural alignment for the two of us, easy.
It would be fascinating to watch, sir.
Yeah.
Megan Eckstein from U.S. Naval Institute.
Yes, thank you so much. It's good to see you, General.
Good to see you, Megan.
So obviously it's Force Design 2030 that you've been talking about, but 2023 is also an important year. It should be IOC for the Marine Littoral Regiments. You should have your second iteration of the EABO training manual. By that point, we'll have light amphibs in acquisition already. And if I'm not mistaken, that will also be when your 4-year time as Commandant would come to an end. So I guess I just wondered, by the time you're done with this job, what should the Marine Corps look like in that 2023 time frame, and what are the biggest hurdles over the next 2 years to actually achieving everything that needs to happen for the 2023 time frame to set up 2030 for success?
A couple things. First, my horizon is 10 years out, every day, every week. I come back into this afternoon to help provide advice, to do what I need to do to support the operating forces, the fleet, and the combatant commanders. But I think my primary contribution to the force is a 10-year outlook. So it was 2030 when I took over, but now I'm in 2032, 2033. Where does the joint force, where does the naval force, where does the Marine Corps need to be? 2023 is significant for a couple reasons. One, we are driven by a pacing threat, as I tried to articulate. So we can't go at our own independent pace and be comfortable with that.
Right.
I'm driven by the rate of acceleration that our pacing threat is moving at. 2023, we have to have a capability that we can provide a combatant commander that provides deterrence. I don't know the magical intersection, in other words, of capabilities and intent that an adversary might see where they try to do something. We won't know that. So we are pressing hard with a sense of urgency to get the right capability in place in 2023 so that we can continue to learn, change it, modify it, expand it, but speed matters. And the unknown, again, are the rate at which our pacing threat modernizes and the capacity they might have. Really hard to tell. There is nothing tied to the end of the 4-year term for the service chief. Part of the reason I took a horizon of 2030, in other words, is get outside the personnel, manpower sort of churn, get outside the 5-year budget cycle, take a deep enough view where there are some unknowns about that 10-year outlook, but not 30 years out where, God, who knows how it's going to turn out. So that's why my horizon tries to stay out about a decade. 2023 is primarily driven by our pacing threat and their rate of growth and modernization. After that, I think the risk keeps going up if we can't put something in the field that Admiral Aquilino, that the EUCOM commander, that they can use. I'm pressed by an adversary. We are pressed by that.
Yep, absolutely agree.
And a silly question, sir, and not to segue. You had mentioned some of the other priorities. Obviously, you'll unveil in your own due time in the DON budget the priorities. But I was hearing you say, number one, ground-based anti-ship.
Yep.
Number two, I think I heard you where you were telegraphing, I've got to be able to defend myself within contested reach, so I've got to have ground-based air missile defense, ground-based air defense.
Ground-based air defense in a expeditionary manner, yeah, we got to have it because we haven't been threatened from that domain in a long time either.
Yes, sir. And then not to be inappropriate, I'm assuming I heard you really say I want to be able to kill not only Chinese ships, right, the 350 ship fleet, but also diesel electric submarines.
Well, in terms of budget priorities, I wouldn't put it in a 1 to 10 list. In terms of capabilities that might help a fleet commander, might help a joint force commander, we need to press into that domain. We need to see, is there anything we can do to help that fight, that
Yes,
part
sir.
of the fight? But the budgetary priorities, I think, are driven by Force Design 2030.
Yes, sir.
But they're not all just I know I don't want to go too long on that. Want to hear the next question, but there are two other aspects to what we need resource for this to work. And they are training and education on one side,
Right.
and manpower, people systems on the other, both of which are antiquated, both of which are sort of industrial age. We have to invest in those two areas, or else the force design, the construct you come up with won't work.
Yes, sir.
We have to modernize both of those systems.
Okay.
Let's see here. I was just told that Jason Props is back on the line from Rolls-Royce. So Jason, are you on? Are you on unmuted?
It's a lot of moving parts.
Yeah, a lot of moving parts. We're going to have to move on, I'm afraid. Ben Goodwin from Kratos?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, General, for taking my questions. I really appreciated your remarks about unmanned systems. I've read the Force Design 23 annual update, and in that document, it indicates that the service has initiated the expansion of VMU capacity by 3 Marine unmanned long-endurance squadrons. And my question is this: do you see additional expansion beyond the 3 VMSs to include attritable aircraft? And what events need to take place or happen to grow your unmanned squadrons?
Yeah, Ben, the answer to the first question, do I think it'll expand into attritables? I do. I don't know whether that means extra squadrons or they will be part of the squadrons we're building now. I don't know that yet. We don't know that yet. But Do I envision attritable unmanned surface and aerial vehicles? Absolutely, yes. How to get there? We're relying on, again, decades of experience from the Air Force to help us accelerate that move. We're relying on proven platforms right now, like the MQ-9, that we know how they operate, we know how to operate them. So in some fashion, I don't know whether you would call it a surrogate, but we're taking what's available right now, telling industry, this is what we need looking down the road, but right now what's available and will do the job is things like an MQ-9. So combine a proven platform with experience from the Air Force into a capability we can put inside the weapons engagement zone and put the numbers up there where persistently you can stare at them. Okay, now you've changed their planning. They have to account for your ability to detect them. And some people call that deterrence by detection. In other words, they have to alter their scheme because their senses, you can sense them. MQ-9s for right now are a great tool for us to do that. What it will be like 6, 7 years from now, I think industry is going to help us get there.
Yep. Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thanks, Ben.
I want to be respectful of your time. We have one more question if you have time for that. I'll ask
Absolutely,
it to be quick. Richard Abbott from Defense Daily, you have the last question of the morning session.
Thank you very much. Earlier today, CNO Gilday said deciding on any...
Sorry, closer to the mic, please.
Sure. Previously today, CNO Gilday said deciding on any LSD reductions would involve a deep conversation with you and your staff. Can you give us your perspective on that kind of ship retirements and those kinds of amphibious factors?
Yeah, hey, thanks, Richard, for the question. First of all, I would say that in the past 2 years, and I don't know that this has always been the case, but the CNO first allowed and then just brought us into the tent, in other words, in a way where together, the Marine Corps and the Navy were talking about the shipbuilding plan and the future platforms. This was not the norm. This was normally the Navy determining what they thought they would need, the Marine Corps giving them a letter, here's what we'd like in terms of amphibious ships. Mike Gilday changed that whole paradigm. I am very grateful for him doing that because nothing directed him to do that, but his sense was we can operate as a team better if we start thinking from the beginning, from the inception. So I'm very grateful that he's allowing us to be in the discussion from the first moment, all the way through briefs last week with the Deputy Secretary of Defense. We're in the room. This was not normal. So I'm very grateful that he's allowed the Marine Corps to be part of that development, part of that discussion. As far as where things fall out, I think in terms of all ship classes, including LSDs, we're going to need, I am convinced, we need a naval expeditionary force forward. We need it persistently, and we need the flexibility that amphibious ships give you with a well deck and a flight deck and sort of what some combatant commanders have called a Swiss Army knife, right? It can evacuate an embassy, it can put down an uprising, it can get there quickly, it can get there to a typhoon, and you don't have to put anything ashore. LSDs are part of that. Do we need a different ship, a replacement? We absolutely do. So the CNO has a big challenge in all ship classes, modernizing, trying to, what do we need to do to keep the numbers up, but at the same time, we got to invest in the new stuff. I think the outcome of all that will be in the right way. And I'm very comfortable that the leadership within the Department of the Navy and the Department of Defense and Congress, everybody's involved in that discussion. So I don't have any concerns. I'm very comfortable with the process and the people that are involved in that.
Yes, sir. And if it's okay with you,
sure,
to allow you to correct my planting of the seed of the unkillable cockroach. I'm sure I'm not going to hear that for quite some time, sir.
No.
If you're really trying to make the case too, the wheat farmer in Oklahoma, about what you bring to the fight,
yeah,
whether or not you bring to the fight or bring to the fight with the Navy together,
right,
what would that one message be?
I think what America needs its Marine Corps to do is, one, be ready to respond to a crisis that pops up unpredictable, unforeseen, anywhere on the world, and be ready to handle it, at least until the rest of the force can get there and sort of backstop us. But you need something there fast, you need something there very disciplined, you need it expeditionary. In other words, not a big force ashore that becomes a burden, but something afloat. So we need a crisis response force. I think they expect us to be very disciplined, to be very comfortable working with other countries, our partners and allies, because we're a smaller force. I think they expect us to be part of the joint force as well. We have a naval heritage, a maritime heritage. They know the economy flows on the water. They need that kept open. They need to make sure that it's not choked off. Oh, to the farmer, you're not going to see what the Marine Corps is doing for you this afternoon. It's on the other side of the world, containing things before they grow, like in Secretary Austin's words, a glowing ember so it doesn't burn into a big conflagration. It needs to be there where American citizens need us around the world. Most of our business, in other words, is nowhere near where the farmer is going to see it.
Yes, sir.
But that's so that the farmer doesn't have to see it.
Yes, sir. The invisible deterrent waiting to stop the fight.
I think so, yeah.
Yes, sir. Well spoken. Well done, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Well
Thank
done. We'll start in about 3 minutes with Duke Richardson at about 12:33 from the Air Force Acquisition.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks very much, sir.
That was
Thanks, Jim.
That was a can of worms.